Welcome to Legendary Talks, a My Spring Harvest podcast, bringing you the best sermons, Bible studies, and seminars from over the decades. Today we're hearing from Dr. Kate Middleton at Spring Harvest 2023.
Welcome. My name's Kate Middleton. I have to start every session with a joke about my name because it's very important to do that. So I am not married to Prince William. If anybody is still uncertain about that, please come and chat to me at the end. Yes. I am one of the directors of a national organisation called the Mind and Soul Foundation, and we are truly passionate about everything to do with mental and emotional well-being. I'm a psychologist by background. I've also been a church leader for 2 decades in various different church contexts. And so what we love to do is to talk to people in the church about this whole topic of mental and emotional well-being. And for me in particular, that isn't just about waiting until we become ill and then thinking about what we do then. That's such an important space, and for the church, working in communities, and for those in the church as well, to be thinking about how we support people who are unwell and do that really well. That is great, very important work. But for me, there's another aspect to this conversation which we so often miss, and that is, how do we live well? How do we manage to survive, but maybe even thrive in this complicated, challenging 21st century world? How does our understanding of our emotions, our minds, the way God designed us, how does that help us to manage our own emotional well-being, particularly in difficult times, but also to bring something to the wider conversations that we're hearing and having about mental and emotional well-being in a season where we're talking so much about those things because they have become such a problem. And of course, this isn't just about supporting us. Many of us in this space today will be thinking about our own emotional well-being, our own issues and challenges and struggles with these emotions of worry, fear, and anxiety. But we also will connect with other people, and many of us will have responsibilities in caring for others, maybe in teaching others, equipping them to manage these most tricky emotions, but also modeling the way that we respond so that people can see something that hopefully might help them. And as we come to today's topic, I'm aware that fear, worry, anxiety, of all the emotions, are the ones that most often cause problems. They're the ones most often associated with illness. And they're also things that all of us will experience on possibly even a day-to-day basis. And it's easy as we come to talk about these things, isn't it, to feel like a bit of a failure. If you look on social media, if you even sit in some church spaces, even sometimes listen to talks given in prominent spaces in the church, you'll hear people say things like, fear is the opposite of faith. Or, in the Bible, there's a do not fear for every day of the year. It can feel like what our faith understanding tells us is that if we get this right, you will not experience these emotions. And I guess some of you may have come here hoping that I will indeed tell you how to not experience these emotions. So, warning, this could be a disappointing hour. Because the problem and the challenge with these emotions is that they are actually part of the normal, healthy human mind. But they also cause so much problem. So what's going on? We might want to become fearless, to eradicate these emotions like some kind of superhero version of ourselves. Teflon people, the world doesn't touch me, I have the Lord. But actually the reality is that isn't real. These emotions are part of the beautiful, brilliant way your brain was designed. So the question is, when they go rogue and they become problematic, what's happening? And how can our understanding of these emotions and how they are supposed to work helpfully, how can that support us in those moments when they have become a real, overwhelming, relentless problem? So the better question really, instead of can we become fearless, is can we learn to fear less? Can we learn how to manage these emotions so that we feel more in control of them instead of them starting to feel like they control us? Can we learn ways to hold them when they feel relentless and inescapable? Can we learn how to drop our tension level in the moments where it feels at its worst? And in essence, the job of these emotions in your mind is to help you make sure that you don't miss anything that's absolutely crucial. So fear and anxiety and worry as a cluster of emotional events are all largely controlled by a part of your brain called the amygdala. And that's kind of like your brain's emergency warning system. And these emotions are particularly triggered by situations where two things are going on. One, something that matters, it's important to you. And secondly, where there is some kind of uncertainty linked to the outcome. So hear me and notice something interesting, therefore. We talk about fear and anxiety when it's around unpleasant things. Difficult things, nasty things, exams, tests, illness, all of those sorts of spaces. But these are emotions that will be associated with anything that really matters to you. So if you don't want to experience fear and anxiety, what you need to do is just not really care about anything. And there are some key things that I would advise you to never do. Never have children, definitely. Probably don't get a job that you care about. Don't fall in love or go on a date with someone you have high hopes for a future with. All sorts of things. And this is the challenge to us, because if we treat fear, anxiety, and worry as illnesses, then when we do the things of life that will trigger them, we're immediately in this dissonant space. And so what we need to do is broaden our understanding of those emotions, thinking of them a bit like a smoke alarm that goes off to warn you something significant might be happening. Might. The job of a smoke alarm is not to make the decision, it's to get your attention so you can then check it out. The analytical part of your mind can explore what has caused this alarm to go off and is there a problem or not. Because we all know most of the time when the smoke alarm goes off, we are actually just making toast. The house is not on fire. Sometimes I ask people in sessions like this, last time your smoke alarm went off, was the house on fire? And everyone says no, and then we carry on. But once, somebody just went, yeah. And I'm like, oh no, that's awkward. So I don't ask that anymore. And the challenge with fear and anxiety is that when we talk about it as a functional thing, like that, the smoke alarm goes off, you go check it out, you can then make a decision, do you need to act or react or not? Of course, when we talk about them in this sort of context, we're really thinking of a very different type of fear and anxiety. And excuse the recap if you were here yesterday, this is for people who weren't. Your brain has an emergency mode. And this is for situations where it's so crucial, so risky, so vital that you act or react really quickly that it changes the way that your brain and your mind processes what's going on around you. And there's two big things that happen when you're pushed into that space in your mind, this emergency mode. The first one is that it switches down your ability to think and analyze clearly. What this does is it makes you more likely to act on impulse, to make quick decisions. The problem, of course, is two things. The first, that you might make a mistake because you're just going on gut instinct. And the second is that everything starts to feel really binary. Life is either one thing or another. Your mind is essentially simplifying the world so you can just act quickly and hopefully improve things. But everything feels one thing or the other, good or bad. You feel like you're succeeding or failing. It feels like people are either for you or against you. There's nothing in between. So in the bad moments, that can feel pretty terrible, like everything's bad, you're failing at everything, everything's against you. And at the same time, in order to make you more likely to act and to do something, you experience this emotional mist rising, this mist of panic, this sense you have to do something. But of course, you can't analyze and think of lots of clever things you could do. So you're much more likely to do one of those instinctive, impulsive things in your mind. It's this sense, particularly when we're talking anxiety, fear, worry, this sense of rising dread, this sense, I've got to get out. All I can do is run. Sometimes we're feeling that instinct, but at the same time, because of the way that our mind influences us in those emergency moments, actually we're frozen. So it's this awful combination of feeling like I must do something, everything depends on me doing something, but not being able to do anything, feeling caught, trapped in that moment of fear and panic. So today I want you to hold in your mind the difference between those two states, this sort of functional anxiety working as part of the way your brain is designed to divert your attention to something that might be important, to change your physiology, firstly to grab your attention. I mean, anxiety is hard to ignore for a reason. We experience it physiologically, physically, as something that's really unpleasant. That sort of squirmy feeling in your stomach, the fidgety sense of unease. It's hard to ignore. And then those physiological changes also set you up so you can act or react. You can run away if that's what you need to do. And there's a big difference between that sort of constructive type of anxiety and what happens if you get pushed into that panic zone when your analytical brain starts to shut down. Worry, of course, is our description of what happens when the anxiety has switched on your analytical brain and it's saying, tick this over, analyze it, think it through. And we get caught in cycles of overthinking it, and we can't get out of that. And when we get pushed into panic, you can't even think clearly, and things start to feel very overwhelming. So hold those two sort of concepts in your mind as we talk and think today. Now, I explained yesterday, so for those who knew, what I love to do when I'm thinking about these sorts of topics is to draw together wisdom that comes from fields like medicine, psychology, and neuroscience, but also with the ancient, beautiful wisdom of the Bible, the stories we see there of people, human beings just like us, living with the body and brains that God designed. And think, how can we learn from those people? And in this, Jesus, of course, is an amazing example. This is God himself in a human body and brain, experiencing everything it is to be a human being, but without sin, without mistake or error. So it's particularly fascinating to look at emotional episodes in the life of Jesus and the disciples and to see what can we learn from this about the way we were designed and how to manage these tricky things as well as we can. And today I want to share with you a busy day in the life of Jesus and the disciples. So it's captured in Mark 6 and also Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 14, I think. I'm quoting from it a bit later. So you can look it up later. But it's a story you all know well. It will be familiar, I would imagine, to many of us. And it's a busy day. The chapter in Mark tells us that the disciples have been busy in ministry. Jesus has sent them out. They've spent a lot of time interacting with people, talking with people, praying for them, healing them. There have been many demands placed on them, and they have given out much. And what we read in verse 30 is that they've gathered around to tell Jesus about what's been happening. They're filling him in on everything that has happened in that day. So I said yesterday, and I'll repeat it again today, one of the other things we need to remember is that in terms of your mind, stress isn't just the bad stuff that happens. Stress is anything that places challenge or demand on your brain. So they've given out a lot. Many demands have been made on them. This has been a stressful day. Even if it's been amazing, they must have had some amazing experiences. They must have been telling Jesus, like, oh, you'll never believe this. We prayed for someone and they were healed. But that doesn't mean it's not been stressful. One of the most common mistakes we make is to think things are good, so I can't possibly be stressed. Some of our best times, our busiest times, are also our most stressful. And the second thing we know in this story is that this is a busy space. The accounts tell us that there's a lot of noise, a lot of people. They're struggling even perhaps to get themselves heard as they're telling Jesus what's going on. Stimulation, sound, people, interaction, all these things again place demand on your mind. Being somewhere like Spring Harvest, so amazing, but actually quite stressful. Today you guys are like, yeah, it is stressful, actually. The weather's really rubbish and I got very wet. I don't mean that. Even in the good moments, so many people, so many interactions, so much that's new. This site is a complete maze. If you've not ended up at the wrong end of it yet, when you're trying to get somewhere, then you're a better person than I am. Lots of demand on your mind. And this is what the disciples are experiencing too, in the busyness and the bustle of the crowd. Thirdly, though, really importantly, we know that they've just had some really bad news. So what we know is that somebody's just come across in the busyness of that crowd and has told Jesus devastatingly that John the Baptist, their dear friend and previous leader to many of them, has been killed. So they've had the worst possible news. You know, it's those sort of phone call in the middle of the night moments, isn't it? I always remember speaking at an event a bit like this, and I had my phone on the table next to me, and I could see it kept lighting up as I was talking. So I'm trying to ignore it and keep going. And at the end, I look up, I've got like 12 missed calls from my old dad. And so as soon as I could get out and get a signal, I'm phoning him, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, something awful's happened. And he's, oh, okay, I'm so glad, I've been trying to get hold of you for ages. I'm like, what is he? He says, I need to know, wherever you are, because he knew I was away, does Sainsbury's sell streaky bacon? I'm like, what? Like, of all the things I was expecting to hear, I thought this was like a life and death. He's like, no, it's really important. I really want bacon. Anyway, not that type of call. Life is such fun. They've had genuinely the type I thought it was going to be. And what we also need to be aware in terms of our stress system, that same system on which anxiety and fear operate, that controls and moderates your ability to keep track of everything going on, your focus, make sure your focus is on the things that really matter. That's the same system as your baseline stress system that just kind of keeps you ticking through the day and keeps you going and managing everything. So when something happens that pulls the bottom out from under your world, everything changes. And the level on that system is unavoidably raised. And again, that can be the tough, the tragic moments. Or it might just be a season of complete change or challenge, starting something new, moving house, getting married, some of those sorts of things going on. But specifically thinking about grief and loss. You know, your mind is like a big Jenga tower. Building blocks, things that you have built the foundations of your world on. And just like a Jenga tower, sometimes life plays around with some of those blocks and you can move them around, adjust things, change things. Life is about change and adapting to the new circumstances you find yourself in. But sometimes something pulls out a block that was really foundational. Grief and loss is like that. The level of work it then requires your brain to do, to reconfigure, to reprocess. What does this mean? How do I live now? Who do I trust now? All of those sorts of questions immediately raises the level on this underlying scale of stress. So we must remember, stress isn't just distress, but things that are distressing or challenging raise the level. So if you think of that scale as a bit like a 0 to 10 scale, if you're like a mathsy person, or if not, think of it like the water level in a pool. We all have like a baseline on that level. And ideally in life, most of the time, it's lower down. We will talk about this much more tomorrow when we're thinking about overwhelm and stress. And at the top end of that scale, there's this sort of crisis zone. You know, the water level's got up to your chin, one more thing, and you feel like you might just go under. On the 0 to 10 scale, somewhere around 8 or 10, you hit this zone where your brain is at risk of being pushed into that emergency mode because the level of demand on your mind is becoming too much. We like to think of ourselves as superhuman, but we're not. Just like our computers, we have limits. You know, I don't know if you're like me, one of those people when you're working, you've got like 50 different windows open on your laptop. And sometimes mine flashes up a little message and it just says, basically, I'm running out of memory, I can't go on. And sometimes your mind is like that too, if it's close to the limit. And it's really interesting because in this moment, in that biblical story, it's like Jesus knows this is where they're at. They're close to the limit. It's too loud. Something really big has happened. The demand on them is high because he immediately says, like, we need to go and find a quieter space. Sometimes we have to withdraw from life in order to give our minds the space they need to process, to reconfigure. And this is what Jesus does. But of course, this is Jesus and the disciples. He's kind of important. And so people follow them. Demand pursues them. How often is life like that? We'll talk tomorrow about when you're stressed and you know you're exhausted and everybody's advice to you is, oh, you need to do less. And you're like, great, what shall I drop? My children, my elderly parents, my job? It's like, it's not always easy to withdraw from demand. People who have real needs have pursued them. People are still drawing on their energy and on their minds. So Jesus responds well to this. He spends time teaching this group of thousands of people. And then it turns out they didn't even bring dinner. This is, of course, the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus deals with their needs. He feeds them again. And finally then, at the end of the day, the people go and it feels like they're able to get some rest, some headspace. And you can sense the urgency because the story tells us that Jesus literally compels the disciples to get in a boat and go across the lake while he goes up into the mountains for some alone time. Well, prayer time, actually. And it's really interesting because the disciples don't want to go. These guys are seasoned sailors. They know this lake well. It is renowned for storms and winds that blow up in the night hours, in the dark hours. There's also a general wariness of water. The Hebrew language links water powerfully with uncertainty and challenge. The root word for water is the same as the root word for chaos. And in the Old Testament, there are powerful links in the narrative between water and chaos and darkness and difficult stuff. So the disciples are understandably reluctant to go into a space where they know they may well face chaos, difficulty, challenge, storms. But sometimes life calls you into storms. Sometimes, through no fault of your own, you hit moments where everything has gone crazy. Sometimes the Lord will call you or ask you to walk into a space that is dark or difficult or stormy. You know, the Psalms say that God's word is like a lamp to our feet. You wouldn't need a lamp if it wasn't dark. So sometimes we're called specifically, like Jesus sent the disciples, to go into places that are difficult. And they do indeed sail into a tough time. The wind starts to blow against them. The accounts tell them that the boat is like buffeted by the wind, just like this building here today. In fact, more importantly, it tells us that the wind is against them. Now, I should confess at the moment I am not a sailor. I have been known to get seasick on a canal. So I don't have a lot of experience on boats, but I am a biker. I'm a cyclist. You might have seen me weaving my way down on my bike to get here. And I know what it's like when the wind is against you. The wind is always against you when you're on a bike, which is a funny thing, which shouldn't be possible, but it's exhausting. There are actually websites you can go to if you're a real biking nerd like I am, where you can calculate how much extra work it takes you depending on how strong the wind is and how much it's likely to affect your times and stuff. But it's not just the physical demand. If you've ever cycled into the wind, there is something emotionally energy sapping about that, isn't it? Because you are giving it all you've got and you are getting nowhere. You don't get any of that sense of satisfaction that what the work you're putting in is having a good impact. Yesterday, we talked about the importance of self-efficacy, of knowing something about yourself. I am basically a capable person and I can bring about good impacts on the world around me. That's such an important aspect of emotional wellness for us as adults. Something we have to teach our young people as they grow. And when the wind is against you, or life is against you, or the world is against you, whatever it feels, you don't have that sense of actually what I'm doing is bringing about a positive impact. It's emotionally really tough.
If you are enjoying this episode of Legendary Talk, you can find more episodes at myshplus.org. As well as Legendary Talks, we have over 15,000 talks from Spring Harvest and other Christian events spanning the past 20 years. To discover more, head to myshplus.org now.
So the disciples have already had a demanding day, and now this. And there's this moment where they realize in the midst of their struggle that they've come a long way, but they've still got a long way to go. I don't know if there's any mountain walkers here. I also love to walk and take my kids on holiday for lovely walking holidays where we climb great peaks. They see that as an absolute joy, I can assure you. But they will talk about fake summits. And what they mean is when you think you were at the top and you get to what you thought was the top and then you realize half the flipping mountain is still in front of you. That's what happens to the disciples in this moment. They've done a lot already, but they realize they've still got a lot to go. It is the darkest moment. They are furthest from the shore in both directions, and it's also the darkest moment in the night. The language is evocative in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 14:26. This is the Message version. It says they were far out to sea. The wind was up against them and they were battered by the waves. It's relentless. It's brutal. You know, the toughest tests in life, which we will talk about tomorrow, are those that go on for a long time. We can all respond quite well in the heat of the moment, but as that gets drawn out, as we have to keep finding resources and energy and ways to keep going, it gets tougher and tougher and tougher. And in the midst of this, what happens, of course, is that Jesus, right in the moment when they felt at their lowest point, he walks out to them on the lake. God shows up in person. But in their befuddled, bewildered, exhausted state, they don't recognize him. I mean, it is, to be fair, unexpected. And this river is actually renowned also for sort of ghostly apparitions that appear in the night. So we can understand a little of their absolute fear and panic at first when they see Jesus coming and they don't recognize him. So as we think about this story and the human reality of it, and as we apply it to our lives, let me share a few key things for you to take away today. And the first one is this: anxiety is not a choice. Anxiety is part of the basic instinctive way that your brain helps you interact with the world. It's hard to ignore for a reason, and it's triggered for a reason. So what we need to do is take away the element of blame and self-criticism when we're struggling with anxiety. So often we get caught in that. We're feeling something and our instinctive reaction is, I don't want to feel this, or I shouldn't feel this. It's not convenient to feel this. And instead of working constructively to think, where is it coming from? Why am I feeling it? We just beat ourselves up. We make things worse. We take a problem that we've got and we add to it guilt, which says if I was a better person or a better parent or a better leader, I wouldn't be feeling this. I wouldn't be reacting like this. Or we add to it fear. Fear is like, what is wrong with me? This is awful. Am I ever going to feel normal again? Do I have anxiety as a problem now on top of everything else? And what we need to do is try and step out of those things. Remember that 0 to 10 scale. Life is challenging enough. If you add to your emotional load, the risk is you push yourself closer to that overwhelm emergency zone. When you're already at 7 or 8 on that scale, the water level is already here. A little thing that you would normally deal with really well when you had the bandwidth to cope with it, those little things can start to feel like really big things. So often people come to me when they're struggling with stress and anxiety and they say, like, I just don't know what's wrong with me. I think I'm just losing it completely. Like this happened. And I completely panicked. It hit me and I overreacted. I couldn't cope with it at all. I used to be able to cope with things, but now I can't at all. Maybe that's because of where the baseline is at the moment of everything that you're trying to hold and handle. And we can tell the disciples are in that overwhelmed panic space because they're not processing. They're not thinking clearly. They don't even recognize Jesus walking over to them. And of course, what Jesus says to them is this. He says, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Now, this is one of those examples you may well have quoted, the do not fears. The exact words depends on which translation you read. So is this Jesus telling them off? Is this Jesus saying, what is wrong with you people? Get a grip. Stop freaking out. Come on. Aren't you better than this? I chose you as disciples. I was really hoping for better. No. And the word that Jesus uses in the original Greek that this gospel is written in, that the New Testament is written in, is a very specific word that describes a specific kind of fear. It describes the type of fear when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel that your capacity to manage what life is throwing at you has been exceeded, where you feel your options are really low, where you feel like your only option may be to run, get out, flee, get away. It's talking about panic. So when Jesus comes to them and says, don't be afraid, he's not saying don't be anxious. He's saying it's okay. You don't need to run. This isn't a reprimand, it's a reassurance. He's saying, I know you're anxious, I know this is tough, I know you're exhausted, but it's okay, I'm here. You're not going to be overwhelmed. You can do this, you can get through it. And maybe that's the sort of conversation that we need to learn to have with ourselves when fear rises and we feel ourselves pushed into panic. Instead of beating ourselves up about having a human reaction, to speak to ourselves and to remind ourselves, it's okay. You don't need to panic. So let's just pull out point number 2. Very, very important. Anxiety is not a sin. It's not a sin, it's not a weakness, it's not a failing. Jesus himself experienced agonizing anxiety at moments in his life, particularly facing his death on the cross. He wouldn't have been human if knowing that was coming didn't make him anxious. And Jesus was entirely human and entirely God. That's what's so amazing and mind-blowing about who Jesus was. So you can experience anxiety without being at fault, without slipping into sin. But number 3, we do have to recognize that in our reaction to those emotions, we have choices. Now, of course, when you're pushed into the panic zone, the problem is you don't feel like you do have choices. Because your rational thinking brain has shut down, it's very hard to problem solve and think of what are the possible things that I might be able to do to solve this, to make it better. You just feel absolutely caught in the panic, the glare of the moment, like your only option is one or two things. But you probably have more options than it feels like. And that's why our awareness of how these emotions are working and affecting our minds is so important. Yesterday, we thought about how often our emotions stir up trouble. The situation is tough enough, but then our emotional reaction just makes it worse, makes it harder. And Jesus advised to the disciples in John 14 to not let that happen. So by understanding our minds better, we can avoid the risk that we'll get pushed into those sorts of spaces where we start acting and reacting impulsively, feeling like we're forced to flee when we might have other options. Interestingly, that verse from Matthew 14:26, when the disciples were terrified, guess what? It's the same word that means when your heart stirs up trouble. Sometimes our minds and our emotional reactions take what's already happening and they ramp up the fear. We're so scared of our emotional selves that once we start to experience these reactions, we push ourselves into panic. And here I do think there's something really important about our culture that only talks about emotions as illness. Because if the only stories you've heard about anxiety in particular, but any emotion, if the only stories you've heard are about illness, of course you'll be scared when you start to experience these emotions. And that heightens the risk that your heart stirs up trouble, that you're pushed into panic, when in fact, maybe the truth is, you've got this. When the smoke alarm goes off in your mind and you go and check it out, do I need to act or react? Sometimes the emotional response that we need to make is not to panic, evacuate, assume there's a fire, but it's the smoke alarm dance. You know the smoke alarm dance, right? Yeah? And the emotional equivalent of that, of just saying, okay, almost like saying to your brain, thank you very much for the alert, but I've got this. I shared yesterday, my daughter is doing A-levels in like a month, 6 weeks or so. And now she's in a really good example of a position where she is going to feel anxious quite a lot, like every time she thinks about those exams. But the correct response to her mind is not to think, run away, because no, she cannot run away. She needs to sit her A-levels. Is, actually, I've got this. Yes, they're important. Yes, the outcome is uncertain. So she can understand why they make her anxious, but she's worked hard. She's doing well. So we need to think about how do we respond and react to our emotions. Jesus' response, as he says to them, do not be afraid, is to say, you don't need to run. He's grounding them. He's trying to help them come out of panic, to then think, actually, how do they respond to this emotion? Sometimes what we need to do when panic rises is not run, it's pause. Take a breath. Just grab a moment. I always encourage people, think about where are you on that scale? The mathsy people, the 0 to 10. If you're more visual, think about the water rising. If you know you're near the crisis zone, up at the 8 to 10 end of the scale, think like, do I just need to take a moment? Get to know yourselves. What are the sort of warning signs in your own actions and reactions that you might be close to that point? You know, when you start, the thoughts just flash through your head, I'm really going to lose it in a minute. If somebody's winding you up, or you start to feel that sense of panic rising, maybe those are the moments where you can learn just to step out for a minute. There are so many tactics you can use just to grab a moment. You know, in work, somebody's ambushed you with some problem that they think you've solved, and you could feel the anxiety rising, like, this sounds really important. How about I go make us a cuppa? And then, why don't we go grab coffee and we can talk about it properly? Just grabs you a moment. I've got this. If all else fails, go to the loo. People can rarely argue with that. Children are an exception. They follow you. Never did I know until I was a parent that I wouldn't even be able to pee in private. But aside from that, think about how are the ways, whatever your context is, whatever the challenges are, if it's work, home, whatever it is, how can you take a moment, get yourself out, grab some fresh air? We will talk tomorrow when we're thinking about overwhelm and stress and burnout. Very, very linked topic to today, about what are the things you can do in a moment that will drop the level on that physiological scale. If you are aware you are about to freak out and you need to not, how can you drop that level? So we'll talk much more practically about that tomorrow. But importantly, what Jesus says to them next, he says, don't be afraid, don't panic, you don't need to run, don't flip out. Why? He says, take courage because I am here. Now, I love this phrase because what Jesus does in this moment is he speaks a common phrase that was used in the Greek language at that time. Now, we don't have it. Interestingly, though, I love it because we as a family spent 2 years in France speaking or attempting, in my case, to speak French and to live in the French community there. My daughter went to a French school, so she's bilingual. She's very clever. She's always criticizing my French. So if she was sitting her A-levels or the equivalent exams in France right now and she was going in, nobody would say to her, like we do in England, good luck. Good luck means like good luck. Maybe by some strange stroke of fluke you might muddle through this. Maybe because of nothing to do with you, entirely just luck and external circumstances, you might somehow do okay. That's not really what I want to say to my daughter as she goes into her A-levels. The French would say bon courage. Bon courage means be of good courage. Basically what this means is, come on, you've got this. I am so proud of you. I know you. I know you've got it in you to do this. Go in there confident. Take courage in yourself. It's the working out of what I talked about yesterday, our inner sense of, are we basically people who we can trust? Can you trust yourself? Am I basically someone who's capable, who's able to bring about a good impact in the world, who's able to hold things and manage things well? Bon courage says, believe in yourself because you've got this. Now, Jesus says to them, take courage, but not in themselves. And this is really important because if you're in a situation that's pushed you to panic, you don't feel like you've got this. That's the whole point. I have not got this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how I'm going to cope with this. I feel completely out of my depth. The water is over my head. I am overwhelmed out of it. I can't even think clearly in this moment. Jesus says, take courage, not in you, but in him. He says, I am here. You are not alone in this. And that's why he says with such confidence, you are not going to be overwhelmed. You don't need to panic. You don't need to run because I am with you. And this is where, as people of faith, we have the most amazing gift. Because when life is at its toughest and we're facing something that we feel completely out of our depth in, we can draw on a knowledge, a wisdom, resources way beyond ourselves. Something way bigger and better than us and our brains. And this is what Jesus is encouraging them to do. So fear doesn't mean you are a failure. Fear is your normal human reaction to something that's going on around you. It doesn't need to be the end of your story. The trick to managing fear and anxiety and worry, all of those closely linked experiences, is about what we do next, our understanding of what that means, of our own resources and capabilities, but also even better, of the fact that we face life not on our own, not in our own strength, but with the Lord standing by us. The Psalms say, and I love that Peter, who we'll talk about in a minute, he quotes this in Acts 2. He quotes the Psalm that says, I know the Lord is right beside me. I will not be shaken because he is right beside me. When Jesus is stood with you, it changes everything. But there's this beautiful story and what happens next, this human story, which many of us will know and have taught our kids and everything. Because Peter, in this moment, it's like he sees the potential of what Jesus is saying. Like, hang on, take courage in you, not in your ability, not in mine. Peter's like, well, hang on, if that's true, if this is really you, Lord, then call me to you because I can walk on water too. So it's almost as though in the moment, the things that, remember a minute ago, felt overwhelming, the disciples thought they were going to die, the wind and the waves and the challenge. And remember, the boat is in the middle of the lake, not on a tranquil, bright, blue sky summer's day, but I like to think slightly the equivalent of Minehead today, but in the dark as well. So the wind is raging, the rain is pouring down. That challenge isn't enough for Peter. He's like, go on, call me to you then, because I can step out of the boat, out of my comfort zone, and do something that I know I would never be able to do in my own strength. And he does. He steps out of the boat, and he starts to walk on water towards Jesus. I mean, that's got to be a good moment, hasn't it? That's got to be when he's like saying to the other disciples, take a photo for my Instagram. Like, this is me on a really good day. This is one of the moments I want to remember. But then it's like in the moment, that battle in his own brain, his human mind starts to rage. Because on the one hand, he's eyes on Jesus. I am doing this through the Lord's power. I am walking on water. But his brain is like, wah, wah, wah. Are you crazy? Like, look at the wind and the waves, and you are standing on deep water, you fool. What are you doing? His entire emotional system is trying to get his attention. And there's a moment when his focus moves to the challenge. His focus moves from his Savior to the storm. And he starts to sink. Because he's right. He is out of his depth. The life of faith, particularly those of us who are leaders, but also in those other contexts we lead, like parenthood, family, friendship, you will find yourself in situations where you are out of your depth. One of the reasons fear and anxiety is such a huge problem at the moment is because there are so many storms raging in so many of our lives where we are out of our depth. We don't have enough money to pay the bills coming through the letterbox. Life is throwing situations at us we don't have the solutions for. There are challenges now and longer term in the future, things related to our own world, but maybe bigger issues like climate change, where we feel really genuinely fearful because human beings don't seem to have the answer. We are out of our depth. In that moment, though, Peter does exactly the right thing. He calls out to Jesus straight away, no hesitation. And notice, Jesus doesn't deliver him a nice lecture on not being afraid. He reaches out immediately and pulls him to safety. It is okay to call out to the Lord when you feel like you're sinking in the storms that surround you. Moving your focus is important. So that's number 5. How do you find your focus and learn how to live life with your eyes on the Lord so that when the storms rage, you're not distracted and you can keep going? I have a friend who's a Pilates teacher, and she always says when we're doing something that involves a lot of balancing or standing on one leg, she says, focus on something that's not moving. And I always say to her, it's such great spiritual advice. When the world around you is spinning and a storm is raging, what's the one thing you can focus on that will not be shaken? Hebrews says that God can be the anchor for our soul, that focus, that security, that stability, that when everything else feels like it started to become unstable and shaken, we know we're still safe and secure. So what does that look like in practice? That's the question, isn't it? Because all this is very nice, but I'll be honest with you, there will be moments for all of us where something happens and we are pushed into panic, momentarily or for longer seasons. One of the important things to remember when we're talking about these topics is you were never called to do this life alone. You were never called to do parenthood alone, or your job, or your church, or whatever the context is. But our culture has become so individualistic, we don't talk enough about these sorts of challenges. So we can help by looking out for one another. Are we really aware that someone's overwhelmed, that a storm is raging around them? Are they acting and reacting in ways that suggest that they're caught in this place of panic? How can we support them? But also, how can we do that well for ourselves? I want to finish just by moving to a passage that Paul writes in the New Testament, in Philippians, where he gives just the best advice about how to manage anxiety, worry, and fear. And I started to touch on this yesterday. This is Philippians 4, starting at verse 7. Verse 7, a very often quoted verse, often not that helpfully for anxiety. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, just notice here that we need to be careful how we naively translate what the Bible actually says. One of the translations you might read on this actually says, have no anxiety about anything. Yeah, that's interesting. It's not really possible with the way your mind works. What it means is you don't need to be pushed into panic by anything. Subtle but important difference. And actually, what Paul uses here is not that word that Jesus uses, as I said yesterday, so excuse the repetition if you were here. It's a beautiful Greek word that describes those moments when the draws and demands on your attention, all the responsibilities you're carrying, all the things that mean so much to you that are going on all at the same time, grabbing your attention, that it feels like you're literally being torn apart. Like, which should you focus on first? Which should you concentrate on? Which can you leave for a minute without disaster happening while you deal with something else? And Paul says, don't be pulled apart. Don't be in pieces because of your anxiety and your worries and the demands on your mind. Some of us sitting in this room will be in a life season where there are just a huge number of responsibilities that we're carrying. You know, you hit that zone, don't you? You're like, I don't know, where let's just say mid-40s or the wrong end of your 40s. And suddenly you've got young children possibly still, or teenage children. You're quite possibly caring for your elderly parents as well. In your job, you're probably now in a position where you're holding reasonable authority, but you, unless you're lucky, some of us may be clever enough to be in this situation, you're probably not the absolute boss, so you're still having to do what someone else tells you. Huge amounts of responsibility. You've got a mortgage, you've got to put food on the table, pay the electricity bills, loads of things that you're carrying. So easy in that space and season to get pulled apart, to be in pieces because of all the things that are weighing on your mind. And what Paul says is, don't do that. Get those things out of your head. This is a very good tip when it comes to anxiety and particularly worry. Because remember, your brain's job in this moment is to make sure you don't miss something that could be important. So its job is to keep it bubbling to the top of your mind. You, however, want to forget it and get it out of your mind. So the risk is you're caught in a battle with your own brain. What you need to do is something that lets your brain know that it's okay to release this thing that it keeps bringing to the surface. I don't know if you've ever been to the supermarket and you didn't write a list. Have you ever done that? You're like, why am I even here? What am I doing? And so you go to the supermarket, you've got 4 things you've got to get. You've got to get flour, eggs, butter, milk. So you walk around the supermarket, you've no list. You literally have to keep saying to yourself, flour, eggs, butter, milk, flour, eggs, butter, milk, flour, eggs, butter. And then you're like, ooh, pizzas are on offer. And then you can't remember what you came for. No, that's just how my husband shops. He comes home, I'm like, where's the milk? He's like, oh, man. Anyway. When we write something down, we get it out of our head. We say to our mind, it's okay, you now don't have to keep reciting it. It's here, it's written in front of you. You can literally write things down, particularly if you're someone who struggles with sleep because of worry. Keep a notepad or something by your bed. You can jot down the things that are in your mind. It says to your brain, it's okay, you can release this. But there are other ways to get things out of your head. Tell someone else about them. Share them. That's like a doubly brilliant thing to do because it gets it out of your head, but also it shares some of the responsibility. Someone's got this with you. It takes you out of that terrifying individualist, I'm in this on my own, and reminds you that you have other people who are with you, supporting you, caring for you. But of course, what Paul's saying is the stage even better than that. What if you could share these requests with the Lord, with God, the creator of all the world? God has got this. He has bigger problems than yours. He can hold the things that are dominating your thoughts and your worries. So what Paul says here is about practices of prayer. How do we hand things over to God? How do we do that in the moments when that feels like something we want to do? You know, those moments you think, I really fancy a good pray now. I really fancy going to church, a good worship song. It's really going to help. But also, more importantly, those moments when, frankly, that is the last thing you feel like doing. Like, literally, there is nothing I want to do less right now than go and sit in an hour's prayers meeting. I'm very sorry, people in the doorways. If it helps, this is a really good illustration of when Peter was then called to walk on water. So you can just visualize how would you feel now. Anyway, yes. I'm pushing the metaphor. So get the worries out of your head. Did you know worries are like flies? When they're caught in your head, like a fly caught in a room, they start to go a bit mental. Bzzz. And after a while, you're trying to focus on something else, but all you can hear is that buzzing fly. Open a window, let it out. Write it down, share it with someone, get it out of your head. But even better, present your worries to the Lord. And then, of course, what Paul goes on to say is that you will experience a peace that is beyond your own brain. I mean, that's what we need, isn't it? In a moment when, if we're honest, our own brains are completely frazzled, you're in that emergency overwhelm zone, you can't think clearly at all. You have no solutions to this problem. What you need is wisdom that comes from somewhere else, somewhere outside your mind. Peace and wisdom beyond human understanding. And that's what happens when we hold things out to the Lord. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about when you're in overwhelm, how does that change our experience of God? How does it make it really hard to connect with God? How does that mean that some of the things we normally do and find helpful might suddenly feel really difficult and not helpful at all? So how do you do that? Come back tomorrow and we'll think a bit more about what it looks like in practice to develop a theology and a pattern and practice of prayer, worship, connection with God that holds us in the overwhelm, exhausted moments, because it's very different to when your brain is lower on that stress level. But then Paul carries on to give some more excellent advice. He says this, he says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. You know, what we've been talking about today, the way anxiety is designed to work, the way your mind operates within the complex, busy, bustling world that we live in, what that means is that your brain has a negative bias. In any moment, on any day, in any pause for reflection to think about how something went, in any moment when we assess ourselves or think, how did I do in that moment? How do I look in that photo? Whatever it is, your brain is biased to negative. It's nitpicky. It's going to spot the things that might be wrong much more easily than it does the things that are good. Paul's advice here is really good because in order to get the balance right, we have to intentionally and deliberately practice focusing on the good stuff. Now, that won't necessarily switch off the worries, but it's about balance. Remember that binary space that your head gets in when you're in overwhelm, where it feels like everything is bad, you are a failure, everyone is against you. I suggest to you that is not true. There are things going on alongside the difficult stuff which are good, which are maybe even blessings, which are skills and gifts that you bring to a situation, which are wonderful moments maybe of love, of cherishing, of fun, whatever it is, friendship. You could so easily miss those when the rain is pouring down and you're overwhelmed by the negative. So what I would say to you is this: we need to practice in calm the things that need to be instinct when we hit chaos. So rhythms and practices and rituals where we train our minds to do this. You'll have heard a lot about practices of gratitude at the end of each day, writing down 2 or 3 things that were good about that day. This is not just meant to be one more thing that you failed at on a rubbish day. Like, I can't think of anything. It's about training your brain to get better at spotting those good things. And it's a really good practice, not so much because of what it does in that moment on Wednesday evening after a rainy day at Spring Harvest, but because of the skill that you're developing and learning, the balance that you're introducing into what your brain spots. Think about those healthy rhythms, things that you need to build in. If you want to share your worries with someone, you're going to need to have people you can do that with. And even better, if you have routines where you create spaces where you might be able to do that with those people. If you are looking to support someone who's going through a tough time, we'll talk about this tomorrow. Can you create a regular space where if they needed to, they could share with you the things that they're struggling with? They might not need to, they might not want to, but you could create the possibility in a regular space. So instead of that, hey, we should meet up sometime, a more specific, like, I'll tell you what, like Mondays at 11, I'm pretty much free every day. Does that work for you? What if we just met up in Nero or independent coffee bar of your choice on that Monday? And, you know, if you ever can't, just text me, that's fine, but I'll be there. And if you want to come meet, it's always nice to see you. Creating those routine spaces where we can manage these things well. And then we will talk again more about this tomorrow, but working on keeping your overall baseline on that complex physiological scale low. So often when people come to me struggling with anxiety, the things that we then talk about are not things they do in the moment when anxiety flares. They're things that they can put into place in general that will drop their stress level. Because if you are already in it up to your neck, a little thing can push you into panic, can push you under very easily. So we will talk about that tomorrow. But as we close today, let's just remember perhaps the most important thing we've talked about this morning. So I started with something that may have been bad news. It is not possible to make yourself superhuman without emotion. You cannot eradicate all anxiety from your life. You are not superhuman, but you do carry something supernatural. And, you know, we're having this conversation just after Easter. The death and resurrection of Jesus opened up to us the most amazing gift and promise that we could carry through the Holy Spirit, that supernatural hope and resource ourselves, so that in those moments we can always stand facing the storm confident that we can take courage, not in ourselves, but in the Lord. We talked about this verse from John 14:1 yesterday, and as I've been praying and thinking after that session, it's feeling to me like a theme for the sessions this week. Jesus speaking to the disciples, knowing they were about to go into the most tough time, chaos, as he was arrested, taken away and killed, the terror and the fear and the scattering that was going to happen to them. He says this, he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let your hearts stir up trouble. You believe in God. That's what we need to hold on to. So let's take a moment to pause and to pray before you go back to your own localized storm. So, Father God, we thank you for your presence in this place today. And as we hear the wind buffeting this space, we think of the storms that are currently shaking our lives. And right now we hold out in front of you, individually and holding each other's situations. We think of all the things right now that we carry, the situations that we don't know how to solve, the questions that don't seem to have answers, the problems that seem beyond us, the demands and responsibilities that feel like they might overwhelm us, the situations in which we feel like we're sinking. And we hear the voice of the Lord whisper over those things. Take courage. I am with you. You don't need to panic. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. So, Father, I pray the reality of that right now, that this just wouldn't be nice words, but through the power of your Holy Spirit, may your peace descend on this space. And I pray particularly for a peace beyond human understanding to guard the hearts and minds of every person in this space now, or watching later, or listening. Wherever you hear these words from, I pray the peace of the Lord would guard your hearts and minds. In the name of Jesus.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Legendary Talks. You can enjoy lots more talks like this at myspringharvestplus.org.